Hello, hello. Hi, everybody. How are you doing? Hello, Imani. All right, how is everybody doing today? So I see Brian and Imani and Madison and Nolan and Anya and Jake and Garrison. Sorry, Garrett, Amanda, Connor, Maggie. I hope everybody's doing well. Boo-hoo! This is our last Friday meeting. Um, okay, so first, hi Abby. Uh, Good, Jake. I'm glad to hear it. I see Jace. Excellent. Okay, so it's boo-hoo time, but also hooray time because it's our last a class meeting. Let's take a moment to just confirm that our if we back time things that I've got things right in terms of our schedule. So if I am not mistaken, our exam week, such as it is, ends on should be the 2nd, I believe, of May, right? So URI has kind of a staggered exam schedule where part of next week is when exams start, and then the exam week finishes on the following week. So hold on just one second. Let me get our calendar up. Okay, sorry, I should have had it up already. All right, so let's scroll on down. All right, so please forgive the typo here in the actual schedule. It says 6-7 and it should say 5-7, but we know that the 7th of May is a Friday, so I was wrong. It's not the 2nd. Forgive me. May 7th. So as a oh yeah, could you leave that up? Because yeah, no. That one needs to be on. The other one can go off. Yeah, sorry, because it's all on the same switch. No, that's okay. All right, hold on, guys. The power just was turned off for a second, so. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so May 7th is when our access to assessments closes. So think about back timing from May 7th to where we are now, right? Yes, it's our last class meeting, but I'm still around. So if you have questions, problems, confusions, comments, whatever, you want to meet, I'm actually going to maintain regular office hours through the end of our semester. I know that ordinarily during exam week, office hours are suspended, but that's, we're in an unusual academic year, so I'm maintaining office hours. If you can't meet during office hours, let me know. We'll meet outside of office hours, okay? So even though today is our last meeting, our last formal class meeting, it's not like you and I are disconnected, okay? As a reminder, you can complete your quizzes, your exams, your retests, your extra credit quizzes, right, at any point up through the 7th. The discussion forums are also open, but I think it's really important that you stick as closely as possible with the due dates. Those are not auto-graded. I read you, I give you feedback, I score you. And if I've got a glut of them to complete, you're not really getting any feedback in a timely fashion such that you can use that feedback on a quiz, on an exam. More importantly, for example, our discussion forums 8, 9, and 10 cover different types of fallacy for each. but you're doing the same work in terms of what I ask you to do in terms of reformulation analysis. So it's important for you to have feedback from discussion forum 8 before you embark on discussion forum 9 and 10, because then you get, some thoughts about how to proceed. Speaking of discussion forum 8, for those of you who have completed it, you completed it last Sunday. Thank you for doing that because you're on schedule. I apologize, I got a bit behind, but I'm completing reading everyone today, probably by the end of business today. Okay, so that's our scheduling items. Questions, problems, confusions. Okay, so I'm going to stop my share. All right. Thank you, Jake. Where are we? Well, remember that we are covering reasoning gone bad. More specifically, we're covering what are known as informal fallacies. Remember that reasoning can go bad technically in two ways, right? In terms of our formal evaluation concepts, where we're talking about the formal logic of categorical logic, the formal logic of propositional logic and natural deduction. When we have a formal fallacy, we have an invalid argument. We have an argument whose error derives from some structural problem, right? So here's a good way for you to make the distinction between formal and informal fallacies. A formal fallacy is, for example, denying the antecedent. A formal fallacy, for example, is affirming the consequent. You wrote about those, or you read about those when we were in the relevant discussion forum in the chapter 2 material that we covered, right? So formal fallacy is a structural error. So a fallacy is just some sort of error. The reasoning error in informal fallacies is an error that has not to do with the structural or architectural features of the argument, but instead has something to do with the fact that, experience just doesn't lend itself to the inference that we're making, right? So the informal fallacy can derive from, for example, the arguer preying on some psychological feature that most of us have, right? So, for example, if somebody is really agitated and seems righteously indignant and is, angrily saying that thus and such is the case, right? We kind of, oh, there's a problem, this person's upset. We kind of get this herd mentality going, and we kind of go along like, yeah, and without actually stopping and asking, well, wait a second. Does this person have a really good point, or are we just kind of following along with their agitation, right? So we're in this domain where the errors that occur are not errors that have to do with the formal structure of the thing. That said, let me give you an example of what looks like a standard categorical syllogism, right? But that fails because of a linguistic shift. So remember, we were covering last week linguistic fallacies, or errors in reasoning that occur when we misuse language in some way. And that includes grammar, right? Or that includes drawing an inference based on emphasis or intonation, right? So hold tight. Thank you. Okay. So here's the piece of reasoning that would say, oh, here's a categorical syllogism. Oh my gosh, this argument must be valid, but I hate the conclusion. The conclusion seems obviously false. Who would accept this? Well, if we highlight the word men in premise 1 and premise 2, what we see is that the arguer, intentionally or not, has shifted from the meaning of the word men in one premise to another meaning in the second premise. Now, from the standpoint of categorical logic, we would say, oh, this isn't a categorical syllogism because we have more than three terms, right? We have more than a major, a minor, and a middle term, right? What is supposedly the middle term, men, is actually two terms. So we really have four terms. So this argument, doesn't satisfy the criterion for, or at least one of the criterion for being a categorical syllogism. And it doesn't because we've got this shift in meaning. But if we don't notice the shift in meaning, right, we might get sort of fooled into thinking that this argument is reasonable, right? So let me pause here for a moment so let's read through this thing. All men are rational. Women are not men. So women are not rational. Men in the middle term of men is, I should write supposedly, or supposedly, right? The middle term in the argument, and as such, it should connect the two other terms. But in the first sentence, men means human, while in the second, it means male of the species. The shift in meaning from the first iteration to the second makes the conclusion, I don't know why there's a comma here, makes the conclusion seem plausible. But once we know the meanings are different, men is no longer the middle term of the syllogism. The reasoning fails. Now, I want us to pay attention for a moment. Some additional, if you will, psychological features. So I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, eons and eons ago, I would pick up, a textbook and a history book in school. I'm in the 6th grade and I'm reading about man this and man that and man the other. And as a child, somebody who believed that I was a human being, but I wasn't a man, right? I would say, oh gosh, okay, I've got it. They mean human being and I'm a human being. And then of course I'd also have these fleeting thoughts. Well, why is it that human being is designated by the term man or men as opposed to, let's say, women? Well, I'd have to think about the fact that, at least in the tradition I was raised, even if I wasn't from a particularly religious family, I was raised in a sort of standard Abrahamic tradition, right? You know that the Abrahamic religions are Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And if you go all the way back to, Genesis, you read that God creates man, and then God pulls a rib bone from Adam and creates Eve, right? So Eve is this sort of, derivative creature, secondarily derivative, right? Man, Adam is the first derivative, woman is the second derivative, and throughout the Abrahamic traditions, women have a very sort of peculiar position, very often sort of considered as subhuman in some important sense, right? So I'm going through all of these sort of thoughts in my childhood, thinking, saying no, I'm still a human being, I still count, and yet there's this sort of residual, for me anyway, disposition or attitude, I should say, that makes me feel a little bit subhuman, right? It's a patriarchal society in which I live, and I am not a patriarch, right? So if you grew up with similar thoughts, right, you might be prone to being fooled by this reasoning, right? Oh, this person's making this shift, assuming that we can just use the word man or men in two different senses, right? So one of the problems with fallacious reasoning of the informal variety is that there's a whole lot of our personal baggage, our collective baggage that gets that gets enlisted to sort of make otherwise obviously bad reasoning seem plausible, right? So to my mind, that's just an enormously important point for us to bear in mind, right? Similarly, as I pointed out in this very general sense, people who reason in a really heightened emotional way, right, will oftentimes sort of get us to just sort of go along in terms of this sort of primal herd mentality, right? We have to stop and say, wait a second, this is not what we want to just go along with. So what we want to do when we're thinking about informally fallacious reasoning is we want to take the same mindset that we used in dealing with categorical reasoning, propositional logic reasoning, or natural deduction, and apply it to the informal fallacy. No, we don't have the same structures where we know that, when we test the argument, the thing is either valid or invalid. But what we can do is bring to bear a systematic way of thinking, a method of working through the reasoning. Hence, the template that I give you in our discussion forum instructions. So let me go back to those, bear with me. Involve an exercise in which you are presented with 2 or more options, each of which is an example of bad reasoning or an informal fallacy. So more specifically, an informal fallacy. And what you want to do is, as you're looking at the relevant section of Chapter 5, you'll want to choose one of the options to write about. And then you're going to rewrite the argument with an eye toward highlighting the error. We'll talk more about that. Then you're going to explain what the problem is. So this is, to my mind, number 3 is, to my mind, the most important part of our work. Here's why. It's one thing to just identify a fallacy, right? And we've got a lot of fallacies that we're covering, and some of us might feel overwhelmed by the number of fallacies that we're covering. But what we want to be able to do is to say, hey, here's a problem. This is what the problem is. So I can explain to you what's gone wrong, and I can also tell you why we want to avoid this sort of reasoning. Okay, so here is the worked example that I think you should use as a template. I give you the same example for each of the discussion forums, right? But we'll work on some together today so that you get a bit more practice. Speaking of practice, don't forget to work your exercises from the text, right? There's no substitute for that. When you get to the quiz, to the exam, you'll see that we've got, instead of written exercises, it's multiple choice true false. But this practice is going to make the work on the quizzes and the exams easier. And by the way, one other scheduling note, I owe you an exam 4 retest. I haven't posted that yet, but I will. All right, so here's the original argument. Julio, our university's student body president, has argued that tuition hikes in the coming years will put a college education out of reach of many students. Obviously, Julio favors a free education, but that's just ridiculous. There's no such thing as a free lunch. Okay? So let's look at what the argument's elements are, right? So what's the premise? What are the premises? What's the conclusion? So I've rewritten the argument not in standard form, which is to say I haven't rewritten the argument so that you have premise, conclusion, one on top of the other. But what I have tried to do is reformulate the relevant sentences so that I'm making clear by that reformulation what the arguer is doing wrong. So here's the rewritten argument. Julio argues against tuition hikes on the grounds that they will prevent many students from attending. That's just one way to reformulate, but it's not the only way. So what have I done? We've got a position, namely Julio's, on tuition hikes. Right. Julio's against tuition hikes because the tuition hikes, he believes, will make college too expensive. Then I go on, second premise. Of course, Julio is only saying this because he's a student. Finally, for that reason, we shouldn't listen to him. So notice what's going on. So here's the problem. Now, you'll notice that I actually assert the name of the error. You don't have to do this, but it's useful, right? It's helpful to you to start connecting the name of the fallacy with the description that you're presenting. So let's look at the analysis. The arguer dismisses Julio's claim on the basis of Julio's status as a student. But Julio's status as a student isn't relevant to whether or not his claim is true. Okay? And then I go on to press more on how this is problematic. And then I offer up a fairly, I hope concise but short in any case, explanation of why we shouldn't argue in this way. Okay? Now, as a reminder, one of your go-to docs should be this one. If we go into our textbook links, we should see the Chapter 5 appendix, which is just a fallacy guide. So here's the list of fallacies in the order that we're studying them, how the fallacy is defined, and an example of each. So equivocation, definition, example, accent, definition, example, amphibly, right? So let's go to ad hominem circumstantial, because that's what I've claimed is going on in the Julio reasoning. An ad hominem circumstantial attack is focused not on the person, him or herself, but on associations and affiliations, such as someone's religion, area of residence, political party, and so forth. Right? So it's the circumstances in which a person finds themselves. It's not something essential to the person themselves, such as, let's say, their height or the way that they look, right? So it's not, it is a personal attack, but it's not the person as such. It's the person's circumstances. Okay. So one thing you might want to do is have, side by side your fallacy guide and the set of options from which you can choose for a given discussion forum. Also, when you're working a quiz or the exam, right? So that you can say, okay, does the fallacy that I'm looking at match this pattern? Is it an instance of the pattern of, poisoning the well, or the pattern of, or does this seem to match the definition of, for example, the ad populum or the mass appeal fallacy? Okay. All right. So I'm going to stop my share. First, thoughts, questions, problems, confusions, comments. So reminder, our final exam or exam 4 is not technically cumulatively a final, right? Yes, you bring to bear stuff you've learned over the course of the semester, but the focus is specifically on experiential reasoning, right? So weak arguments. What sort of classification of weak argument do we have here? Okay. What do we think? How are we doing? Questions, comments? confusions, thoughts, otherwise. Okay, Amanda's going, thumbs up. I know that one of you had sent me a message either earlier in the week or maybe it was late last week. Forgive me because I can't remember the date exactly, but here's like, you said something like, I'm not quite sure what I meant to do. And then we had a conversation where I said, well, can you kind of pinpoint what your confusion is, et cetera, et cetera. I hope that the process, the method that I'm asking you to employ to make sense of bad reasoning is clearer, right? So if you had suspended work on discussion 8 because you wanted to wait, for example, until we met to talk more about it, I hope that this helps. But please, if you have residual questions, problems, confusions, let me know. Right. I know I've met some of you over the weekend or in the evening right. So I am around. I know that, one of you had wanted to meet the other day and I was in the midst of some other things. I totally dropped the ball and I wrote back this morning, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I didn't address your email. And the person said, well, I already took care of it now. So I'm like, oh, so even if I'm, if I don't get back to you within 12 hours, 24 at the outside, don't be shy about saying, hey, Mia, I wrote you, what's up? Right. Because I know that you're under stress, end of the semester's coming up. So I don't want to put you off. Okay, so last chance for the moment, right? Questions, problems, confusions, comments. Okay, that said, something comes up, yell at me. I want to move on to, I'm going to share my screen again, bear with me. Okay, can you confirm that you see a Word document begins with the word circular reasoning? Thank you, Jake. Okay, so FYI, I've stolen this stuff, but I think that it's a nice source. So I'll give you if you look up yourdictionary.com, you can get a nice set of definitions and examples. Now, what I'm starting with is circular reasoning. You might say, but Mia, circular reasoning isn't, explicitly in our list of fallacies. Well, as an FYI, I have collapsed circular reasoning with what's known as question begging or begging the question. Now, while technically these are two distinct types of error, it is not unreasonable for the sake of getting started to treat them as if they are kind of one and the same. And I say the reason why it's not a bad idea to treat them as if they are one and the same is because for a lot of us, clarifying the problem with this general sort of error is a bit tricky. Okay. So, question begging is classified as a fallacy of presumption or a fallacy of unwarranted assumption. Now, I think I mentioned to you last Friday that while it is true that in our text, I take the approach that, most every critical thinking text takes with respect to fallacies, and I group fallacies, right? I say, here's a set of fallacies, they fall under this heading, or they're classified this way. Here's a set of fallacies, they're grouped this way or classified under this heading, right? But that organization is really not crucial. If it helps you, given the way that you learn, to think in terms of, header and then list of fallacies and a definition, great. If you say, I don't like learning that way, don't worry about it. You don't have to. I've just organized them the way that I have to start helping us with some sort of clarity in terms of how we want to think about a group of fallacies. So a fallacy of unwarranted assumption, or fallacy of presumption proceeds by way of sliding in an assumption without calling attention to it. So it's typically not stated, right? But it's an assumption that we wouldn't accept for the purpose of the reasoning going forward. Okay? So, a prime example of this that makes the problem really clear is what's known as circular reasoning. So let's look at some examples. Everyone loves Rebecca because she is popular. You must obey the law because it's illegal to break the law. Harold's new book is well written because Harold is a wonderful writer. America is the best place to live because it's better than any other country. Violent video games cause teens to be violent because violent teens play violent video games, right? Notice that each sentence, right, premise, conclusion, each sentence is simply a restatement of the original, right? So you're not actually getting anywhere. It's like I read in a news article, someone saying, well, that's fake news because it isn't real. Right? One way to think about a fake thing is to say, well, it's not a real thing. It's not authentic, right? Okay. So now let's move forward to question begging and see if we can, make some sense of the error, bringing to bear what we just saw with respect to circular reasoning. Freedom of the press is one of the most important hallmarks of a modern open society because modern open societies value the ability of the press to report on what's happening. Second example, I am confident that God exists because it says so in the Bible, and the Bible contains God's word. Destiny is real. Everything that happens to us has already been preordained, written in the stars. It explains the chance encounter that leads me to meeting and marrying my future husband led me to meeting and marrying my future husband all those years ago. The Apple iPhone is the best smartphone on the planet because no one makes a better smartphone than Apple does. Avatar is the greatest movie ever made because it is the #1 top grossing movie of all time, right? This granola bar is the healthiest thing you can eat because it's made with all natural ingredients. I know that everything I experience is real. I can touch it, smell it, see it, hear it, and even taste it myself. Let's pause for a moment on these last four, right? And highlight the following. Best and no one makes a better, right? Leads us to realize, so let me go ahead and highlight. Is it fair to say that in this case, best and better, or no one makes a better, right, essentially say the same thing, right? We could also say, well, wait a second, what do you mean by better? I mean, we could say that Apple iPhone isn't the best smartphone, not in terms of price, right? So we need, this person is making some assumptions, at least one assumption, that needs to be stated and probably is not one that we would say advances the conclusion. Okay? Greatest movie ever made and #1 grossing movie of all time, right, commits a similar error, right? What do we mean? Greatest movie ever made does not necessarily equate to top grossing movie, right? There are other ways in which we might define greatest movie ever made, right? So this person has assumed that being the #1 top grossing movie is going to cut it. And it doesn't necessarily do that. It doesn't even, plausibly do that. We have to argue for this view that being a top grossing movie is what makes the movie the greatest. Healthiest thing, all natural ingredients. Well, you can have all natural ingredients and still have a food that is not the healthiest thing you can eat, right? For example, you might have a cow in your backyard who happens to produce milk. And, if you drink it, yeah, it's all natural, right? Nothing is, and let's assume that, your cow is eaten in your backyard. It's got, organic grass and blah, 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 all this sort of stuff, right? There's no manipulation going on. But that doesn't mean that milk is the healthiest thing you can drink, right? And then everything I experience is real. And there is the assumption that your sensations give you the relevant reality. Well, what if you are, for example, a brain in a vat? Not necessarily, right? So one of the things, I'm going to stop the share real quick. One of the things that you want to do when you're reading instances of fallacious reasoning is to first note the moment where you say, wait, what? Because that's a key intellectual gut moment. If the wait, what is also a recognition of some confusion, try to spell out what the confusion is. Because typically the more you drill down into that confusion in terms of trying to explain what the confusion is, the easier a time you will have of recognizing what the erroneous reasoning is. Does that make some sense? And what I'm trying to do, because there is a good number of fallacies that we cover, is I'm trying to give you some general strategies for how you can approach the analysis and evaluation of this bad reasoning. Okay, so what do we think? How are we doing? Apparently my dog is not doing so well because she's on her fainting couch being emotionally traumatized. Questions? Problems? Jake's given a thumbs up. Awesome. Okay, now I'd like to get a quick sense from you guys about how you are responding to the fact that there is a fair number of fallacies to cover. Does anybody feel a little overwhelmed? It's just like oh my gosh, it's an avalanche of fallacies. Does anybody feel overwhelmed? Don't be shy about saying so, because I want to address it. Nobody's feeling overwhelmed. That's wonderful. I mean, I'm assuming science. I am assuming silence means you're doing okay. Nolan, Amanda. Okay. All right. Great. So, okay, Nolan. Yes, you are gonna pass. Don't be silly.
Okay, I'm just scared.
Well,
there's sometimes where I do great, and then there's sometimes where I totally tank, and I'm like, wow.
Okay, so what we want to do in that case, thank you for sharing that, Nolan, because what we want to do in that case is try to discern a pattern of, as you call it, tanking. But right, but also now Amanda's put this, let's talk about what Amanda said, because this also, Nolan, might be useful. Amanda says, yeah, I'm feeling a little overwhelmed, but the appendix helps. Okay, so let's think about it this way. Example, I mentioned to you guys that I'm from Los Angeles. I'm spending time in Rhode Island, and P.S., guess what? I'm staying. So we made arrangements to get our stuff from Los Angeles to here to Rhode Island. The movers arrived on Wednesday, and oh my goodness, the house is a mess. Boxes, right? So I'm feeling like, oh my gosh, overwhelmed. What do I do? And then I stop and I say, wait a second.
Yeah.
Here's what we do. So now I'm taking a page out of the Amanda Kiley playbook. Hold on a second. I know that I've got book boxes, I've got clothing boxes, I've got, right, kitchen boxes. Let's take all the clothing boxes and put them over there. The kitchen boxes, put them over there, blah, blah, blah. Furniture that, you know, I'll just put it over there, right? So what we do when we're feeling a little bit overloaded is we say, okay, hold on. Let's try to group things according to likeness. Okay, so hold tight. Okay, found it. Okay, so you know, this, remember our guide, right? But also, if we go, let's go back into the textbook. It should be, if we go into chapter 5, if memory serves, it's something like page 37? No. 34. Okay. So on page 34, everybody, right? Here is our list of fallacies organized by header or classification. And one thing you could do, Nolan and anyone else, Amanda also, you can say, all right, here's what I'm going to start doing. I'm going to start with what the general idea, what the general concept of a linguistic ambiguity is, right? And then I'm going to say, okay, well, what is the general concept of a fallacy of relevance? What is the general concept of weak induction? And same with presumption or unstated or unwarranted assumption, I should say, right? So think about, so here's now we can drill down a little bit. We already know about causal reasoning. We already know about analogical reasoning. And we already know what makes a piece of causal reasoning weak, a piece of analogical reasoning weak. Oh, we're already good with that. We could even take the general feature of each and help us to make sense of the classification, right? So that's another way that we can go. Finally, because I know that we're running up on time, and I don't want to be disrespectful of your time. Let me also have you think about either opening up the keys so that you can see worked examples, or go into the workbook and just work on chunks of, so let me just scroll down here. Work on chunks of fallacies. And what I mean by that is work on, for example, the set of fallacies under linguistic ambiguity, right? So here's a problem. There is a grammatical problem with she ate the cookies on the couch. You can draw multiple inferences depending on how you understand the modifier, right? So, you know, you can just look at the worked examples also so that you start to see the patterns, right? Of each type of reasoning. Okay. I do think having, when you work the quizzes and the exam, the relevant quizzes and the exam, having the fallacy list, the guide that Amanda points out and that I just showed you a couple minutes ago, is right next to you, or, you know, print it out if you want to go through that process. That's going to be really helpful to you, sort of to match up.
Okay. Sounds good.
Okay, so folks, one other bit of housekeeping before we break off. You know that I have done a stellar job of crapping out on our grade book. And what I mean by that is, remember the original way I set up the grade book? It just totally suppresses your score. And then there have been other ways in which I haven't used Brightspace's grade book with any real proficiency. You know, I've already apologized for it. I hope you also know, but if you don't, reminder, or I'm telling you that, I will make sure that I go through everybody's, you know, your scores to make sure that the grade book is accurate. I will also make sure that I will, you know, I will alert you when I think I've got the grade book in order. So if you get alerts saying your grade has changed, your grade has changed, your grade has changed, maybe just ignore them until I push out the announcement that says, okay, I think I've got everything in order. Please review before I submit final grades, right? Because I don't want to get it wrong. And I also, I don't mean to foist my work on you, but I appreciate it when you are vigilant about what your scores should be and alerting me to errors. Okay? So I'm around. I'm not going anywhere. Let me know if you want to chat. Otherwise, have a wonderful rest of the day and a wonderful weekend. And congratulations. Our first, and I hope only, full academic year online, right? We'll have stories to tell. Okay? Take care, everybody. I'll talk to you soon.
You.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.